Thank you. Thank you, Raphael. Oh, nice to see so many of you today. And hello, everybody who's not here, taking it lying down in their suite. I just have to say, how many people got on yesterday? Anybody? Oh, congratulations. We need all the help we can get there. And for those who've been on before, you're familiar with my presentation somewhat in that I, first of all, apologize to the Aussies in the audience for mangling any pronunciations, because, and as my motto is, nobody has an accent, they have a personal vocal perspective. So bear with me. And this is, I call this the Golden Coast because there is the Gold Coast and the Sunshine Coast and the Stinger Coast. And Australia has probably the greatest shoreline on Earth because it has oceanfront property everywhere. And this is actually Mululaba as we're going on our way up into the Queensland. But you're all familiar with Australia being so larger than Western Europe, larger than United States, not quite as big as Canada or Russia, larger than China. So this whole stretch from Tasmania up to Cape York on the north tip of Queensland is about 5,000 sea miles. So that's a pretty big stretch. We are, of course, going up toward north of Brisbane to Mululaba to begin our trip. And I'm just going to show you some things you may get to see, some things you may not get to see. And our first stop is Mululaba, and I liked Steve Stevens' comment about it. It was named as a cattle holiday spot, so all the cows could go to the shore and wish they were somewhere else with more vegetation, maybe. But it's in the Aboriginal name, and it is like many of the original names. They were native, and then they added on all the other ones. But you can see this whole upcountry above the shore, the Noosa National Park, and a lot of walkways and preserves down on the shore. But we'll be going into this bay to anchor, so there is no large entrance or dock for us to stay. But you can see how well developed it is. The point with the lighthouse, and then we will be in the bay and then tender into the various facilities at the marina. So it has a very sheltered harbor inside, though not for a big vessel like our own. And then it has many holiday homes and canals and boats and such. So it begins to look a little bit like Florida or other places where they have communities that are lining all the water, and so many people have their own boat. Now this makes everybody a sailor eventually. But the town has a walking street when we come off from the ship. And then it just stretches out, like most of Australia. It's much more vast than anybody can go see at all. But this is the best beaches just to the north of Brisbane. And again, we're now becoming, the summer is over and we're cooling the weather off, and the trouble has subsided through much of Australia with the fires and the heat. So that there won't be that many people up here because they will have gone back to the cities or down to the south. But you can see the appeal of this area. From here all the way up into further into Queensland, this is the best beaches on earth. They would advertise, of course. There's a lot of competition, but they particularly have a lot of good hotels and infrastructure, and you can get around, and it's not dangerous in any sense. So this is the preferred vacation spot, particularly for many Asians who surprisingly have not come to join us on this trip. In any case, this is the average day out here, and a lot of it is not much to say about it, except that all I know is I'm a professional sailor, so the first thing I do is stay out of the sun and wear a hat. You might have seen all those little kids being taken around Sydney. They all, by law, must wear a hat now. Otherwise, you get a fine. But some kids ignore that and go out and play. This is a curious thing that happened up in Noosa, just north of Mumulaba, where the sea kicked up in the storm a big foam, and it covered the whole beaches with that. And so then the question is, how did this happen? They think it might have been because there are all these fires, even up here this far, and the smoke was just covering thousands of miles out to sea, and so that the ash particles precipitated into a kind of a foam, and it all came back on the beach like a big sudsy pleasure for these kids But it's now gone. That's just let's say, recent news about how the Earth is doing things that we don't expect. Well, anyway, when you get to Mululaba, one of the attractions, they have an underwater world of the sea life aquarium, and of course, even the squiddies are fashionable. The sun's getting so strong that even the fish get sunburned, it turns out. And you can go in there and see actually sea life that otherwise you have to go diving to go see. So here's a purple octopus. Just woke up after its lunch, and you can go see this. I mean, if you're not a diver, this is the safest way to go out and see the fantastic sea life in this whole coast. Of course, some creatures are hungrier than others. But Queensland stretches out. New South Wales border is down there on the bottom of the picture, and then you have Brisbane area, the Wide Bay area, and then all these towns up in these regions and subdivisions of the state of Queensland. I mean, Queensland is bigger than France, Spain, and Italy combined. Just the territory is so vast, and then it stretches up, going up into the Coral Sea and the Torres Strait, Cape York on the northern tip of it, where it becomes very tropical and going up into Indonesia and those tropical belt of the planet. But it's more pleasant down near Brisbane and down where we are, the Gold Coast, the Sunshine Coast. As you go up further, it gets hotter and thicker. And a lot of it used to look like this, mangrove forests against the shore, where it wasn't actually a natural beach. But that's the ecosystem that is so vibrant for a lot of the sea life and bird life, land life. They will meet and spawn or feed in these what would be impassable to us territory. When the tide comes in, there's water there. And the mangroves are very unusual because they're the only forest that actually grows with salt water. And there's a mechanism in the leaf that will precipitate and drip salt out, and so that the tree can survive even though it gets no fresh water. And then it spreads out and buffers the coast from particularly storms. And it sponsors a lot of bird life, fish life. Here are what's called the eastern curlew, which is like a sandpiper that walks around and looks for hors d'oeuvres. And then upriver you have a lot of these, not big mountains, but hills that will, in the season, particularly the rainy season, you have rushing waters coming down, and some of them are accessible, some of them are preserved. So I think there's a rafting trip out of Cairns on it. But a lot of the land is flat, dry, agriculturalized. This is sugarcane growing in Queensland. And so the agricultural industry, along with the mining industry, has been the driving force of settlement, now matched by tourism. So you do have some hills. The Great Dividing Range is the border between the coast and then the interior of Queensland, which is largely unpopulated. But here it's another place we'll be going, Noosa, which is a small town on that spit of land, and then has the river coming out in the ocean and beautiful beach. But this is a sort of a boutique town that is famous for seafood and for its resort living, dining out al fresco. There's a lot of seafood from here all the way up. Many things, particularly the lobster, they call bay bugs, and other shrimp and reef fish and things like that. So there is an excursion up to there, Noosa, just for the day out of Mululaba. And then the highways go up the Sunshine Coast, go to the south to Brisbane, let's say. I'm going to show you a little bit about just Brisbane, which is on the lower left-hand side. You have the city inside of Moreton Bay, and you have this big island that's a preserve outside, but you can see there are no beaches. And so Brisbane was never a resort area. It was a commercial center for the development of agriculture and trade in this whole part of Australia. And it's a very big city of about 3 million in the center, but it's developed quite broadly out on these bays and islands and upland. But it's another, I call it, ever growing glass mushrooms. They're just like every year there's a whole nother bunch of them, and you wonder what everybody's doing in them except having a nice view. But the thing about Brisbane, is those of you know it, is it has the river that goes right through the town, and they have water taxis all up and down the river to outside community. So it's sort of like Sydney, in that you don't need a car. You can just walk down from your home to the dock and go into town and go to business and then come back. So it's a particularly clean and healthy and enthusiastic city. Its symbol, it says in Meliore Signum, which means things will always get better, which seems to be the motto of Australia. Well, like other parts of Australia, it was founded as a convict colony, and this was the first lighthouse built in 1820 by convicts. All those convict families are now city elders and prosperous families. But they had a lot of conflict up here during the settlement years with the ever, let's say, what's the word? Difficult relations with the Aborigines, because further north in Australia, in Queensland, that was actually the largest population of Aborigines. Further outback and south, they were relatively fewer. So that led to more conflicts with the settlers, and they had what they call the extermination wars in the 1860s, which estimated killed about 25,000 of the Aborigines in this Queensland, Brisbane area. And this was a bit of a shock at the time, because the Aborigines had not really fought back very much until they came with organized groups to attack the settlers. So this is the tragedy of the past. But then Brisbane, of course, developed quickly, and the land was plowed and the mines started. There was a gold rush upland, and then Brisbane became a major port. And as part of the, back then, in the British Empire, it sent troops to the Boer War. Here they are walking in through the center city of the time. Then also they went to World War I, and then they also went to World War II. And so the Anzac heritage, as you know, is very strong in Australia, that they have sent more percentage of their soldiers per population than any other part of the empire, and maybe for good, maybe not so good. But here they are again, marching back from World War II in Brisbane. There are a few of the historical buildings left, just City Hall and the Parliament House for the state. And so there's very little historic sites other than that, because the city's grown so big and so fast. But particularly, again, on the water side, there are beautiful walkways all over. The South Bank on the right of the picture is where they developed an arts center and public parks. And there is a tour there, so you'll get to see a lot of this in passing. This is Brisbane's version of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, the Story Bridge, built in 1940, and that crosses South Bank into the Central Business District. But again, a lot of the people come up here not for business, they come up here to have fun. And so the beaches, particularly up north as we keep going, is the attraction. So this has been, let's say, the holiday choice for Australians and international visitors for a long time. And it's, let's say, a very healthy place with its sports phenomena. I mean, I don't want to go into the sports, but the Australians are probably the biggest fans of all sports that there ever was. Here, cricket, but Aussie football, all kinds of games. But the biggest sport of all is just lie around and enjoy the sun and the view. Again, it's just amazing how many big buildings are here. But I think anybody who ever made any fortune of any size in Australia gets a condo on the Gold Coast here, and then they have their holiday there. Just to the north of Brisbane in Mooloolaba, there's this another big river that comes out, and this is sort of typical of the coast. You have this big sandy island, Fraser Island. This is just before we get to the Great Barrier Reef. That's the world's largest sand island, and it sort of shifts around in the tides between the sea and the sand. That's the sandy cape right there. But that's unpopulated. They do have, it's a national park, and it was unfortunately badly burned this year. So I don't know how this wildlife is doing. But then you can see Harvey Bay is a bigger town just on the other side of that. So as we go up the coast, we have all of these islands and the Great Barrier Reef, and then a few ports. So we will be going first to Airlie Beach and the Harvey Reef off of it, and then up to Cairns. But you can see there's other ports in between this vast coast and the Great Barrier Reef, which is the fringe of the entire land here. First, we're going to go to the Whitsunday Islands. Maybe some of you have been there before. This gathering of small islands that are near the southern tip of the Great Barrier Reef. You can see the reefs outside of the island group. But we will be going into Airlie Beach, which is the access to these different islands. And there are 75 major ones, and a lot of this is all dive sites. That's up on the upper left. That's my personal island. My last name is Hayman, so that's my private island. I invite you to go visit there. But bring water if you're coming. And we are first anchoring at Hardy Reef outside of the islands for those who want to get off and have the morning and afternoon snorkeling or scuba diving or just swimming around off of a barge. And then we will go into Airlie Beach, which is the access for all the other islands. But out there on the reef, this is one of the more fantastic parts of the Great Barrier Reef. They call it the river, which is a kind of a channel through all these reefs out there. It's not big enough for a ship this size, but we will go in there near it, and then those who get off will go on a catamaran to the floating platform, where then you can go out and see the fantastic shallows. And this is the beginning of the vastness of the Great Barrier Reef. So this is where we would go if you take that excursion first thing in the morning. The ship continues into to Airlie Beach, but then there's this transport cats that will take anybody that gets off the ship back into Airlie Beach then to rejoin the ship. But you can see there's sort of a full-service platform that is moored there permanently with swimming areas and diving areas, and that's where you'll really get the immediate sense of being in the reef itself. So then we will go into Airlie Beach with its small town with its facilities, and particularly there's an awful lot of yachters who come up here with their boats and go traveling through these beautiful islands. As you can see, there's a bit of topography up in these islands that you don't have actually out on the reef, and therefore it's safer sailing. But here's where we would get off and continue on into town. It's not a very large town, maybe 2,000 people live in it, but it gets hundreds of thousands of visitors during the season. But you can go just take a walk in the town if you want. But above all, don't go swimming. In this, we are still in the season of what they call the stingers. So Airlie Beach and also Cairn will have a lagoon, which is a salt water that is filtered so that it doesn't have the little jellyfish in it. So you can swim in that, but however beautiful the beach is, you can only swim in the lagoons for your own safety. This is the Iakjangdi in the Aboriginal name up here, but it's typically called a stinger, and it's a very small jellyfish. You cannot see it in the water, and they come in a little bit of a cloud, and then they'll sting you all over. And this is very dangerous. So they have the real tough Aussies will have a stinger suit and cover themselves up completely. We really should have a formal night like this. Everybody can get their wetsuits on. If not a toga night, well, you can pass the suggestion along. But these particular divers, they have the typically cheerful but tough Australian look to them. But if you do get stung, there are these stations where you pour vinegar all over your stings until they evacuate you, and then have a bit of an antidote. But it can paralyze you, and if you don't believe so, don't try it. But anyway, then the shore goes on, and here's I just found this picture of these beautiful Norfolk pines. They come from the island of Norfolk off in the Tasman Sea originally, but you see they're typical all through New Zealand and this part of Australia, but they look like a collection of Christmas trees. And right here in the Whitsunday Islands, it's fairly lush. It's not quite tropical jungle yet, so it's a very mild climate and beautiful seascape and islands. So this looks somewhat, we passed through, what was it, Queen Charlotte Sound, Cook Strait in New Zealand, and it's similar to that, to a very generous sea mountainscape. This is Whitsunday Island, the biggest of them all, which is very varied in its land, but it has this one particular area called Whitehaven Beach, where it has the whitest sands in the world. And you can appreciate it from above, but you can also go there. You can see it's a part of the national park. It's not developed with houses and marinas and all of that, so it's considered a prize of this ecosystem. And for millennia, that kind of high silica white sand has been deposited there, so that it's sort of so white you have to wear sunglasses to walk around on it in the sunshine. But it reflects all the light, so it doesn't get hot, so you can walk around barefoot on it. But this is an excursion out of Airlie Beach. We'll go out there and you can land and go onto the white sands. This sand is so fine that it's considered polishing sand for, particularly the Hubble Space Telescope was polished with sand from this beach. And it'll get into everything, and so they say if you have a camera or anything, the sand will get inside of it, so you don't want to pack much when you go out for a walk on that incredible beach. But it is sort of a national treasure. You're not allowed to take any home, except in your shoes. There you go. That's the Whitehaven Sand Beach. But it's sort of an abstract painting from above, and but you can see it in real life, and it's quite a treat if you're wearing a hat. Here's another atoll that's out there, the Heart Atoll, which you'll see featured on most advertising campaigns to come to the Whitsunday Islands. So there's more. Hamilton Beach is more settled, and then my island, Hayman Island, is out there. That's so exclusive they don't let me back in anymore. And they'll let anybody in. I don't know. So this is holiday land up here. Nothing like a warm Christmas day out on the ocean. Now this is the Great Barrier Reef, which stretches over 2,500 miles, 4,000 kilometers, all the way up the coast. And most of it's an outlying reef, so that within 50 to 100 sea miles, it's out there in this ridge line of former hills of a coastline that had been slowly inundated in the last 100 million years. But the coral that was growing there kept picking up, so that underneath every reef there is a sandstone former dry land. But it has maintained its reefs right above water over the millennia, and it stretches all the way down from Sandy Point near Brisbane Cape, Sandy Cape, all the way up to the Coral Sea, Papua New Guinea, and then, of course, there's a lot of other coral all through the Indonesian waters. But this is the greatest single structure of living creatures on Earth, the creatures being microscopic polyps, and it's not all connected. It's some 900 islands, 4,000 separate reef structures. And so this is the great national and world heritage. But it has a lot of problems because it has all these rivers that run off into the waters. The Great Dividing Range is to the west of the green here. But you still have a lot of agriculture and mining activity upland, which then has been spilling out into the sea, along with all the people and some development. So it's of great concern to scientists and to the national government and to everyone about how the Great Barrier Reef is going to survive these times. The biggest problem being the water is warming, and it's also getting more acid. And that has direct effect on all of the reefs. Coral and all these animals can adapt somewhat, but when it's happening too fast, they literally get heat exhaustion, and then they stop reproducing or they get bleached out. So anyway, the humans that go out there are actually not that much impact for just our diving, scuba, except for the sun cream has chemicals that then are also a pollution in the water. So now they ban certain sun creams if they have whichever that chemical is in them. And the area is vast, almost beyond our comprehension. If you fly over it, you can appreciate it more because you'll only get to dive and see a little bit of it. There are little islands you can go out to visit, and there are resorts out them, but most are uninhabited and inaccessible. And if you have your own private boat, you can go out almost anywhere and have your undersea experience. So again, I'm a scuba diver, and on the last segments, I was out with my friend diving as much as possible. I don't know if I'll have the opportunity here. I have been under all these areas, and it's the usual wonderland. Here's they call a surgeon fish, and lots of different kinds of coral, hundreds of kinds of coral. This is the world's greatest collection of undersea life. These are soft sponges and mumu in New Zealand. They call that fish. And here's a giant clam, which I once was just like that, and I almost put my foot in it, and it went pump. But that's just a story. They're not that hungry. But you can see all kinds of things. I mean, you can look at all the movies and see all you want. These creatures are probably the most ancient in a reef. They're literally a swimming dinosaur. And if you go to the aquarium, you'll get some of it, but there's nothing like the actual living reef because you have so much variety of life, and particularly this, you can see over there, that is a swimming spider crab. And I'm sorry, spider star. And lots of other kinds of coral and fish. The parrotfish and lanternfish, and these are anemones here, another star, brain coral. But you can see the different color. That is a ridge coral, and there's just so much if you can go down under there. But I got to just show you a couple more. This is the Triton trumpet, which grows very big on the Great Barrier Reef and is now endangered, so you can't go out there and just pick them out anymore. But it has this incredible structure of its circular nautilus kind of housing in its shell, and then there is a voraciously hungry beast inside of that. Here is one of them eating a starfish. So if you go down there diving, you'll see the real struggle of the sea is who's eating who. And there are a lot of beautiful big fish, kind of grouper fish. But here they call them a coral trout. And this has been such a favorite of particularly Asian customers that they've been fishing them out and capturing them live and sending them live on an airplane to Tokyo and Shanghai and Hong Kong. But now they're breeding them as a domesticated fish. So hopefully the stocks will remain and they will grow more just for that market. But here's my favorite big fish, the humphead wrasse, also called a Napoleon fish. And these grow to be bigger than my arms can stretch out. And we saw one up in Raiatea the other week ago. But this is a very peaceful, slow-moving fish. It'll come up and rub noses with you, and it doesn't seem to be afraid of anything, though I think it ought to be. But this is such a big fish. There's one up on Green Island, just north of Cairn, that is sort of a resident pet. But it's so elegant, what can I say? And then there are other creatures. I mean, there are whales, sharks, and such. But there are dugongs, the sea cow, that are inland toward the mangroves and in the rivers. So there are some of those, you can't see them because they're living in seclusion under the water. They come up for air, though, but occasionally you can see them if you take a river cruise. That's where they are. This is a manta ray with a unique, I don't know if it's a sunburn, but this was in the news all of yesterday, that they took this picture up north of Cairn, and this is the only pink manta ray ever seen around the world. And I think it's because it got a sunburn. But what do you think? Or else it's dressed for a party, one or the two. But that's quite a sight. Again, fearless creatures. They'll swim around you and they don't bother you. But then the coral is really the basis of the whole barrier reef. That's a a tree coral. Here's another one that is sort of a crown coral. And again, we see these things that are just incredible constructions, take thousands and thousands of years. The structure is the deceased ancestors of the living coral, which is always on the tip and the edge and growing particularly on the top where there's more sunlight. So again, they will grow up to 2 to 3 centimeters a year in the right conditions, so that even if the sea is getting higher, they can keep growing. That's the story of why there's a reef there, except that now the worry is that they can't grow that fast with the rise. This is the other great problem of the Great Barrier Reef. This invasive crown of thorns came from Indonesian waters, and this will crawl along. The thing is, a meter wide, and it'll devour all the coral, leaving it completely gone. And so now there's a bounty, and divers go down and spend all day catching them, bringing them up, and then they dispose of them, because if you chop them up down there, they actually will multiply. But here's a nautilus shell, or rather a triton, that is actually attacking and eating a star coral. Well, what's happened though is between the acidification and the temperature rise, you have the northern section of the Great Barrier Reef has been severely bleached, center not so much, and where we're going soon is still in relatively healthy condition. But this is a phenomena that's being closely monitored because, like all the other weather in the world, things are going a little out of prediction. So this is what's left, a bleached bed. Where there's green, that means the algae is still on the living coral, but where it turns white, that's the skeleton. And what's happened is that the symbiotic life of a coral polyp, which is a little animal that burrows around, it has an algae in its gut that digests plankton, and then it feeds the coral polyp. And this is a very simple symbiotic relations, but when it gets too hot, the polyp will expel the algae for reasons we don't know, and then the whole thing will die and become a bed of dead coral like this when this is low tide here. So this is the tragedy that's going on now, and it's been getting worse and worse every few years. 2015 was the worst year. It's been a little cooler this year, but then it depends on how adaptable these creatures are. There's a lot of research whether you can replant or engineer the biology of coral. There's a strain of coral that lives in the Red Sea that they have brought to Australia to see whether it'll take to these hotter waters. And the other problem is shipwrecks and other oil spills and the controversy over whether they're going to build another coal terminal to take the mine products of Queensland out through the reef to the markets where they go. And so this is a big debate in Australia, how much they can damage the reef and the other parts of the country to feed the coal and mining industry. Well, anyway, we're going to come into Cairn, which is the northernmost city in Queensland, and where there is a dock for us, and then there's a town with all full services. And this is a beautiful place. You can see the mountains behind it, and then the ocean, and then the reef is behind where we are. But it was originally a pioneer settlement where they went for timber and fishing, and then started farms and tried to make living in what was a much more humid and tropical area. And so it developed as a small city, and it remains that way. There are only about 100,000 people, but mostly now is a resort center and also educational center and tourism. Particularly a lot of Asians come there. Again, it'll probably be mostly empty, but you can see it sort of spreads out, and there's farther suburbs. But you see, again, the mountains in the back, and there's excursions out into there. The waterfront has an esplanade, and above all, it has easy walking streets, and so this is a most pleasant town to stop in. It has these casinos and hotel, and recently they built this reef hotel, which features a wildlife adventure up in the dome over the hotel and casino on the ground floor. So they have brought in trees and make a big terrarium and pool with crocodiles and zip lines, and so you don't have to leave town to get snapped at by a crocodile or called at by a cockadoo. No, sorry, kookaburra. That's the famous bird that sings in the morning in Australia. And you can get up close and personal with a croc. You don't have to go jumping in the water to meet one. In the center of town, you can see there's the beach and the lagoon. Again, they have built a stinger-free park pool for everybody to go swimming right downtown, because you don't want to go out in the waters at all this time of year, get all bit up. But this is again a kind of the center of the city is a big swimming pool. How many towns get a big public swimming pool like this as the town square? And then the coast goes on up to Cape Torres, and that's where it becomes pretty much wilderness. Again, I don't know why they're in the water, but half the year it's okay. Other things to do out of Cairn when you have the time or the excursions that are on the ship, you can go up into the mountains, the Barren Falls, the Kuranda Railway, and then the Sky Rail. Oh, how about that? I didn't know where this came from. The Sky Rail comes up and goes up into the mountain over the canopy of the forest, so you can ride on a little funicular and look down on all the creatures that are looking up at you. And there's a rafting trip on the Mulgrave River that comes up out of the mountains. There's curiosities, even in town like this, of big fruit bats that are hanging in the trees. Don't wake them up. This is the train ride, Kuranda, which is originally built for timbering and mining up in the mountains, but it goes over some 37 bridges that were put in the gorges, and people go up there to look at the top of the Mulgrave River Falls and the gorge. So that's a little bit of tropical interior for Queensland. And then there's also the Chapukai Aboriginal Center, which is a recent construction and attraction just to give people a taste of the Aboriginal culture up here. And that's a story that we've already mentioned in a couple of the talks, but the Aborigines were probably maybe 50,000 all over Australia, up in this area, maybe 10,000 prior to contact, and all with their own local customs and their own local language. There was never a unified Aboriginal nation. It was like North America, or the Americas in general. You had many, many tribes, many groups, and they often fought, and they had their own territory, their own traditions. And so a lot of this was unknown and very much dismissed by the first settlers. And this center, like other parts of the country, they're trying to reappreciate the spiritual life of these people. It's said that they are perhaps the oldest living culture on Earth, remnants of perhaps the first humans who crossed over from Africa, and they ended up all the way down here in Australia when there was a land bridge. And so they have the longest and deepest memory of any humans on Earth. And of course they were pretty much hunters, gatherers, living in Stone Age conditions. So their memory was particularly enhanced. They could recite myths and tales from tens of thousands of years ago that have been carried down through oral tradition with dances and music. And it's kind of scary to some people, but a lot of it was very ceremonial. The musical instrument, you see the guy on the left with the didgeridoo there, which is the drone trumpet, and some rhythms and bull roars and other instruments, which are to us not necessarily musical, but what they were meant to do is put people in a trance. And they would go into what's called dream time, which there would be visions and recitations and ceremonies, initiations, and a very rich cultural life in contrast to material poverty. But that was just a matter of your opinion. I'll go back to one little story I read of one of the Aboriginal groups had a myth about the creation of humans when the sky mother and father gathered all the animals together to create the earth. It had much dissension from the animals because the fish wanted legs, the kangaroo wanted wings, the birds wanted to swim, and the insects complained that they were made too small. And it went on and on. All the animals you could name all had a complaint. So the sky mother and the sky father put them all in a cave together, and then they collected whatever they wanted, and they said, you can't have that, but we're going to create another animal that has much more capabilities than any of you, and that's the humans. And so out of a bit of mud, they made the first Adam and Eve, let's say, in the Aboriginal tradition. And then they let them all out of the cave, and that's been the way the world has been ever since. But then the end of the story says that the humans were so capable, they all also inherited problems that the animals don't have. Jealousy, anger, greed, and all the other 7 sins. So that's just a Aboriginal tale for you. I'm sure it's true. Anyway, we'll have our day, and I believe we're there for the evening in Cairn, and we can enjoy it. But you can imagine what it was like when Captain Cook came on the Endeavour. Here's the reproduction coming up through the Great Barrier Reef. He actually was lost in all this myriad of islands and reefs and trying to get around this great piece of land he didn't know where it would end. And he hit the reef and holed the ship, and they had to pull it ashore what's north of Cairn and Cooktown. But we are having our own version of that without that much trouble. And I do believe we know where we're going, but we'll find out. Anyway, thank you very much and have a great trip on the Golden Coast of Australia. Thank you.